Hello, everyone. I'm Wendell Jones. I'm the ambassador of the Bahamas to the United States of America. And on our webinar today, we are going to be speaking with a number of Bahamians. And so we welcome you to this 22nd edition of our programming here in Washington, D.C., as we continue our conversations with members of the Bahamian diaspora in the United States. And what we have been doing in recent times, we've also been speaking with people from the Bahamas in New Providence or in other islands of the Bahamas who are joining other Bahamians in the diaspora in the United States. And so today we want to talk about Bahamian culture. In international relations, soft power reflects the ability of a country to influence other nations of the world through the attraction and persuasion of certain things rather than force. This influence is often achieved by leveraging a nation's culture. And so today, on this 22nd edition of Conversations with the Bahamian Diaspora, we will speak about cultural evolution in the Bahamas or of the Bahamas. And as I mentioned, we have a very exciting panel today. Linriche Johnson is the cultural attaché in the Embassy Consular Annex of the Bahamas in Washington, D.C. She is well qualified for that position, and in a minute, she is going to tell you more about herself. And then we have Dr. Nicolette Bethel, who is chair of the Academic Senate of the University of the Bahamas, and she is a former director of culture in the Bahamas. Stefan Thompson, who is associated with the university in New York, New York University. He is in the faculty there. And then we have with us Tamika Galanis, who is assistant professor in the Department of Film and Media at Syracuse University, and Letitia Bullard. She is assistant director in the New York Youth Symphony. Welcome to our webinar, and it's very good to have you all here today. I'm going to ask you to tell our audience a little more about yourselves. And so let us start with our cultural attaché here, Ms. Johnson.
Good morning, good afternoon, His Excellency, and good afternoon, Bahamas. As Ambassador mentioned, my name is Linriche Johnson. I'm cultural attaché here in DC. My beginnings, I've always been a fan of the arts, always been a lover of performing, all the way from primary school, all the tapes that my mom has, singing and dancing and acting every opportunity possible. And I really believe in Bahamian culture. I was rushing on Bay Street at the age of 10. So John Canoe was really in my bloodline and in my body. And since graduating high school, I came to America and went to Till University to study theater arts there. Graduated, came to Maryland, and was a director apprentice at one of the theaters here called Olney Theater Center. And then furthered my education in arts management in Chicago at Columbia College Chicago. And it was really there that I grew in my understanding of the arts as a whole, but also how important it is to integrate art culture and who we are as an individual with the things that we love. And so that gave me a lot of opportunity to work at different theaters in Chicago. And I came back to Maryland, back at Olney Theater. They hired me full time. And it was an exciting opportunity to be an ambassador in my own way to really represent the country, to represent our people, to introduce individuals to Jonkanu and to Rake and Scrape and all of these different elements as well. And I'm so excited to be here now in this role as cultural attaché, really broadening the knowledge of what it is to be Bahamian and what it is to have Bahamian culture integrated into the American space. So I'm very honored to be here today with you all. I'm excited for the conversation.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Bethel?
Thank you very much. I don't know what to say. First and foremost, I think I should say I'm a writer. That's what I've always been from I can remember myself. I grew up in a cultural household. My father was the first director of culture for the Bahamas, E. Clement Bethel. He was also a composer, a conductor, a teacher, and he was a great inspiration. I am a trained anthropologist, which means that I get to deal with the theory of culture. And I served as director of culture for the Bahamas in the 2000s. And since then, I've gone back to the University of the Bahamas where I get to do anthropology. But my real focus, don't mind all the rest of that stuff, the Senate and all the rest, is theater and the Dundas Center for the Performing Arts, Shakespeare in Paradise. Those are kind of my babies, and I am trying to put in place in reality the kinds of things that we saw a need to do when I was director of culture, and the kind of things that I write about when I'm doing my academic work. I'm trying to lay a foundation and to put in place a reality in the Bahamas where people can express themselves as fully as they would like to without necessarily having to leave the country, and also where they can actually work in the performing arts in the Bahamas if they so desire.
Very good. Ms. Galanis?
Thank you, sir. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm Tamika Galanis. I am assistant professor of film at Syracuse University. I'm a documentarian and a multimedia visual artist. My work is really concerned with archival futurities for the Bahamas, with a keen eye on climate change, preserving what we have, what we actually want to present from an interior view of what represents Bahamian culture.
Okay, very good. All right, let's speak with Letitia Bullard.
Good afternoon, everyone. So excited to be here. I consider myself a musical storyteller. So I'm a writer, composer in musical theater specifically, but I branch out a little bit. I grew up in Grand Bahama, born in Nassau, grew up in Grand Bahama, and I guess similar to Lynn Richey, left after high school to do to study. I studied music and graphic design in Michigan, and then returned home. Got to use some of those things that I learned teaching for a while here, and then recently I went back to the U.S. Specifically, I went to New York. I did a master's in writing and design for musical theater at Berkeley, NYC. And since then, I have been privileged I was assistant directing with the New York Youth Symphony, specifically their musical theater songwriting program, which was amazing. I did that this past year. And now I'm currently back home in Grand Bahama. And I think similar to Dr. Bethel, I'm really passionate about growing the culture, the theater arts in the Bahamas and making a space where I think like Bahamians, even from very young, can learn how to what do you call it? Can learn how to just grow in the performing arts, get the training, get the resources that they need, and if they want to work in the performing arts at home, make that possible. So that's kind of what I'm all about, what I'm passionate about. I'm just happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Very good. Okay, let's hear from now Stefan Thompson.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Bahamas. Yeah, so like everyone has spoken so far, my journey has been just woven with so many different pathways that led to where I am right now. I grew up in church at Victory Baptist Church in Nassau with love for music. My parents couldn't afford lessons, so I taught myself how to play the piano. And in that time, I didn't realize what I was learning as I was listening. I was learning how to write music as well. I fell in love with the orchestra. I fell in love with the different instruments in the orchestra, and I wanted to learn how to play them. So along with the piano, I taught myself how to play cello early on, and then I eventually got lessons when I went to undergrad. And my church started a band. It was led by Dustin Babs. He was the leader of the police band for many years. And he also turned out to be my cousin, actually. He's from the Bahamas. And he taught me tenor sax in that band. And I went to St. Augustine's College for 7 to 9 and R.M. Bailey for 10 to 12. And it was there that I got to meet a bunch of people from all over the Bahamas who was playing different instruments in different bands. And back then, the culture around music in high school was just it was so strong. And a big part of that was thanks to Mr. Justilian, who was at governor of Government High at the time. We used to have this big band that would play at the hotel some years ago. I don't know if they still do it now, but it was that left a big impression on me on what music in the Bahamas could sound like, especially from young people. And a lot of them didn't have formal training. Their parents couldn't afford lessons either, but they found a way to make music. And so that was very integral into me becoming who I am today. And after I left R.M. Bailey, I worked for a few months and I went to Pensacola Christian College. It's a college up in the northwest part of Florida. They have a very strong music program. And that's where I really got the formal part, like the skills to really apply and the craft to apply to what I knew how to do naturally. And from there, I came back home. Oh, and it was also there that I wrote my very first original piece. It was a song for choir and orchestra, and I had never written for those things before, but because I was in the choir and orchestra while I was there, I was listening and learning at the same time. After I graduated from there, I came back home because I wanted to share what I had learned with Bahamians growing up. And I taught at Nassau Christian Schools, Nassau Christian Academy, taught there for 9 years. And while I was there, I felt like I kind of plateaued a bit because I'd done everything. I'd become the head of the department. And, I had some summer camps going on where we taught kids how to play string instruments. And I said, you know what, there's still this love of composition in me because I was loving learning how to write and just enjoying sharing what I knew how to do. And I really prayed about it and they said, listen, I know what I know how to do and I want to share more of what I know how to do. I don't get better at it. And that led me to a workshop that they had at New York University because during all this time, I tremendously enjoyed film music, listening to John Williams, Alan Silvestri, all these big film composers who I still enjoy today. And that led me to New York University where they had a workshop, a summer workshop. It was a very intensive workshop, and that's where I really got to understand the process in creating film music. And then after that, I applied to the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, and I did my master's there. I stayed there for a year, and then the pandemic happened, and I came back home and I finished it online. And after that, I applied for a few PhD programs, and the one that I wanted to go to most was the one that I got accepted. One of the ones that I got accepted into was at New York University, and that's where I am now, studying screen music, and also I write music for films, for movies, and also for the stage, which is one of my loves. I just enjoy listening to the orchestra. While I was in Boston, I would go to the orchestra almost every weekend, the Boston Symphony. at Symphony Hall, which is where I had a piece performed, actually, which is very, very rare to get a piece performed there. So it was a bunch of dreams coming true. And like a few of the other panelists have said, like, I want to share that with Bahamians because, you know, I graduated from R.M. Bailey, and I didn't think a lot of things was possible for my future, simply because of where I come from. My parents had enough money for lessons, but now I'm studying at one of the best universities in the world, getting the top degree possible in music. And it baffles me every day that I made it to this point, and I'm forever grateful for it, and forever grateful for the culture that I come from that is so strong in the arts. And yeah, I'm just happy to be a part of this panel today as well. Thank you.
Very good, very good. I particularly enjoyed the Boston Symphony playing Brown Girl in the Rain the other day that I heard, and hopefully you can share some of that music in the not too distant future, the orchestral music with the Bahamian audience.
Yes.
But let's move, and it's very good that you all introduce yourselves in great detail, because part of this webinar is for Bahamians to get to know people in the diaspora. And so today we are so happy to be talking about Bahamian culture. So for starters, Dr. Bethel, as one of our late icons used to say, Sir Charles Carter, these are Bahamians. And the question is, what is a Bahamian?
Wow. I would start to answer that, but I think Kareem Mortimer is also in the room. So
Is he ready? Okay, good.
yep, Kareem is here.
Yes, good. Forgive me. So Kareem, you were late to the webinar, but it's good to have you. So can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I got to hear everybody's introduction as well.
Very
So
good.
thanks.
Good.
I'm glad to be on this panel. Yeah, so my name is Kareem Watermore. I was once a podcast host. I'm not currently a podcast host. I'm a Bahamian filmmaker. I've been making films for the last, I would say, since 2001. So I don't know where that puts us. 24 years. A lot of the work that I've done for the first 20 of those years has been in the Bahamas. So I've made 3 feature films in the Bahamas, all which have sold internationally. 2 short films that also sold internationally, and a lot of documentaries. So I dabble in both documentaries and feature filmmaking. Um, in 2021, I had the opportunity to move to the US to set up a company called Best Yet Entertainment. And Best Yet Entertainment is it's a production a financing entity which invests in media, and we also produce. We're mostly producing now. I've had the opportunity to produce uh, executive produce about 5 or 6 films, uh, including 2 Sundance films and a Cannes film that won the Camera d'Or, an Iraqi film by Hassan, which is premiering in Toronto next month. We also were able to be a part of co-producing a revival of The Wiz that was on Broadway. And we are also producing in-house our own television show, which is called Rachel in LA, which is a spin-off of our Bahamian series, This is Paradise. So we just wrapped Rachel in LA about 2 months ago. And, we're looking to, still a director. And so we'd be looking forward to doing more work at home as well. Um, yeah, yeah. So
Very
that's
good.
what I
Very good.
do.
It's a delight to have you all here today, and I think our people here in the embassy chose extremely well to have you all participating. So welcome to all of you. Dr. Bethel, as we were.
Thank you. So I'll just do the anthropological definition.
Yes.
So in anthropology, when we look at the idea of culture, we see it as the invisible bonds that keep societies together. And it's that the language, but the language of symbols and of activity and of expression and so on, that is unique to a particular group in a particular place and time. And so whenever I start I teach a course called Bahamian Society and Culture every fall. I'm just getting ready to do it. And so before I get to discuss what Bahamian culture is or isn't, because these are really loaded things and we have all kinds of preconceptions about what our culture is, I say, let's look at where we are and what time we are and what things help form us. Because one of the things that anthropologists will tell you is that culture is not fixed. Um, there's a theory that says tradition is fixed, culture is lived, and culture is a response to where you are and when you are and all of those forces that are shaping you. So when I talk about Bahamian culture, I ask my students to take a deep dive into our geography, first of all. Being an archipelago, that's almost at the unconscious level of our self-identification. We don't really know how much being an archipelago, having a bunch of different islands, having the sea everywhere around us really affects who we are, but it does. And then our history of being our history, which is so, I don't know how to even begin it. It's so colorful, so critical, so important to the modern world, given that the Bahamas is the place where Europe landed in the Americas, where the whole exploitation of the Caribbean and the Americas began, where the exercise of plantation slavery was enacted, where the beginnings of modern capitalism were developed. All of these things are in our part of the world, and they affect us and who we are, and they continue in different forms, and they shape who we are. One of the things that is really interesting for Bahamians, and I'll just stop after this, is 31 years ago, the Bahamas was featured in Washington at the Smithsonian institutions. I can't remember what they call it, the Folklife Festival of the Americas. And one of the things that was really interesting was it's a living museum. And so at that time, what that meant was we had a group of people who went throughout the archipelago of the Bahamas and basically gathered together what they call tradition bearers, the humans, the individuals that could talk about Bahamian culture and do those things that were traditionally Bahamian. The thing that really got me was that all of these old people, they were all in their 70s and 80s for the most part. Every one of them kept talking about the tourists that they were meeting in Washington, meaning the Americans, right? And we were in the United States of America. So the other thing that shapes us and our culture and how we think about ourselves is our relationship to tourism. Because one of the things that maybe we don't recognize in the Bahamas is the Bahamas is probably the pioneer of tourism in the Americas, right? 1860s, we started commercial tourism. So that means that for 200 years, pretty much, we have been hosting people and defining ourselves with relation to tourism. So I'll just stop there, but these are the kinds of things that permeate us and make us who we are.
Well, that's a mouthful. Because I heard in there cultural imperialism. We should talk about that because we're talking about the influences on the culture of the Bahamas, be they good or bad.
Yeah.
And let's hear from Ms. Johnson, the cultural attaché here, on your take on what it is, what being a Bahamian is all about.
Absolutely. So I had the privilege of attending the Music of the Bahamas musical that Shakespeare in Paradise put on at Orlando Shakespeare Theater this weekend. And it was such a beautiful display and I think reminder of where we come from. It was so historical in a sense that most of our culture is really rooted in Christianity, and you don't really find that in other countries. We do define ourselves as a Christian nation, and I think that has really been like the bedrock of who we are. And so I think it's just integrated in everything that we do, whether it's rake and scrape, John Canoe, the way that the reasons why we cook, and the reasons why we come together as a community. And so I think too, as a Bahamian, you know, the first thing usually that we think of is John Canoe. And it was so interesting as someone who knows history and knows culture to also, you know, keep learning. And one of the things that was so interesting is that John Canoe wasn't always just the music. It was also a form of protest. It was a form of us being able to say what it is we wanted to say and speak up for ourselves. And that even just reflects in our pride. And, you know, they say Bahamians, you can't really run over them. Like, we say what we mean and we mean what we say, and we don't, you know, let people run over us. And that's reflected in the way that we're independent today, in the way that we're able to go all over the world and be who we are proudly. And so I think at the end of the day, when it comes to being true to who you are, and really digging deep and finding those roots of, I am a person who is involved in my community. I am a person who always has that strong root in Christianity. I think those are the things that really make us, you know, set apart. And I can't speak without bringing up our accent, our dialect, our language is just so unique in a sense that, you know, it can't really be copied. If you hear someone speak, you're like, you're Bahamian, because you can't make that up. And even the words that we say, I think a lot of culture influences our words. So, you know, we could have one person go viral for saying something, and then like it just becomes a part of our language, you know? So I think, like Dr. Bethel mentioned, culture is something that we live through, and it keeps evolving. Our language keeps changing. Even now with all the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha, more words are coming together. And it's just a sense of like, someone says something and you know what they mean, you know? No one else in the world says kapunkalap, you know? So it's just an amazing experience to have that communal understanding and be able to see each other as, yeah, I'm a Bahamian.
Well, so you're saying in effect that, as Dr. Bessel said a while ago, that the culture is not fixed. It's evolving.
Absolutely.
We've had we've imported a whole lot of things into our culture, and I believe that we might have exported some things from our culture as well. Ms. Bullitt, let's hear your take on it. You know, I was in South Carolina recently, and speaking to people about the Geechee people, and the impact that they've had on Bahamian culture, which I believe is quite profound. And perhaps you might want to speak to that, Ms. Bullitt.
Well, I think I don't think I'm as well versed to speak about that particular connection
Okay.
as maybe others on this call. But just in regards to Bahamian culture, when you ask about it, what does it kind of mean to be Bahamian? I was thinking about my time in the States, like the things that I've experienced. And the reason that comes up is because like when I'm in Michigan, when I went to school in Michigan, I didn't really expect to find like a ton of Bahamians that far north, but I was just thinking about how it's kind of crazy that even in a school I went to at the time, it was, I think, the number one ethnically diverse school in the US. But when I went there, I don't know what it is, but it's like all the Bahamians gravitated towards each other. Like we just end up finding out, oh, you from Nassau or you from Andros. Like we just like made a huddle. So at some point, all the way up in Michigan, in this very cold, very not traditionally Bahamian climate, you have a section of Bahamian students who,
You
at
are
least in
clannish.
my experience, yes. Yeah,
Yes.
fair. But you have this section of Bahamian students that just for me, it felt like a piece of home away from home, you know? And it's kind of one of those things that I resonate with what Lynn Riche was saying about, like, there's something about the accent, it's something about the way that we speak, it's something about like the way that we just understand things, or like certain experiences that even if we haven't personally had them, like our mommy had them, or our cousin had them, or our grand auntie or something, like we just get it, right? And I think, I don't know, I feel like the culture in itself is definitely one that's hard to define in one like simple way. But I think there's a almost like a communal understanding, and there's a kind of like a communal understanding and harmony amongst Bahamians wherever you go, like whether you born and raised here or whether you like left at some point or have like your relatives were from the Bahamas. There just seems to be something about it for me that always brings back this feeling of home, and
But
that's one of the things I think I'm most grateful of.
should it be that difficult to define? You know, when you ask a young person what it means to be Bahamian, it should be very easy, Dr. Bethel.
Yeah, except for the fact that we are a bunch of archipelagos. I mean, we are a bunch of different islands. And so there are many different ways of being Bahamian. There's not just one Bahamian dialect. There's a whole bunch of different Bahamian dialects. Even in New Providence, there are different Bahamian dialects. There are dialects that are so
Different dialects or different accents?
Both.
Okay.
So different dialects, maybe not so much for schools. A dialect, because dialects have different, I don't want to get into it, but dialects will have different vocabularies and so on. But there
Yes.
are definitely different dialects across the Bahamas from north to south and west to east, less so. But even in New Providence, you got not just different accents, different speaking groups, depending on your own background, depending on which school you went to. There are definitely different accents depending on what school you went to. And so I think one of the things that maybe we overlook is the fact that when you are an archipelago, your borders are so porous that we are automatic. I don't want to say it like this, but we are automatic chameleons. One of the things that people have often said to try and say Bahamians don't really have a culture, or we don't know what our culture is, or whatever, is that compare a Bahamian to a Jamaican. As soon as a Bahamian goes somewhere, they sound like they came from that country, which is actually not true, because I'm listening to all of y'all and y'all don't sound like y'all come from the States. But but you say a Jamaican will always sound like a Jamaican, right? That's often what's said. But first of all, there are fewer Jamaican accents. There's a limited range of dialectical variation in Jamaica. There's a huge range in the Bahamas because we have pockets, linguistic pockets. In Eleuthera, there are different, like Eleuthera, you can't understand the people from the north or from the south. They have such a wide range of dialects, even there. So the richness of our culture is still unknown, and the breadth of our culture is such that it makes it hard to define, because there are so many different things that are Bahamian that you can't necessarily hold on to one. So we generally say, okay, it's Junkanoo, overlooking the fact that Junkanoo is actually really only truly indigenous to about 6 or 7 of our Bahamian islands.
And even Junkanoo itself is evolving, eh?
Of course.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Stefan Thompson, let's talk about your take on all of this.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everyone so far, and that further proves that culture is hard to just pinpoint and agree on one definition. I like to think of it like kind of what Dr. Bethel was talking about just now. I like to think of culture, or anything that we can analyze, as we can start from the macro level. We can look at what does culture mean just generally from the Bahamas, from people looking on from the outside looking in, or us as we agree on these certain things, these tenets, or anything really, then we can bring it down to the meso level, which is more of the industrial or community level, where we're talking about these different islands that have, when I was in Pensacola and I met some people from Bimini, my goodness, I could not understand what they were saying. And these are I could better understand someone from the Gullah Geechee for better than I can understand someone from Bimini. But that's just further shows that, listen, we have differences in the way that we speak, and everyone from Bimini that was at that school, they spoke the same way. They can understand each other. And I was there just trying to focus, like, okay, can you code switch a little bit for me? So from the meso level, we also can look at the micro. What does culture mean to the individual? What does my culture mean to me? And we can see from each of these, they're going to mean different things to different people. And I like what this, because when I was researching for the piece that I wrote that was premiered in March, called Forward, Up, and Over Together, I realized a lot of things about Bahamian culture, because I like these philosophical inquiries where we talk about what makes something something, these ontological questions. And I realized that Bahamians are, we like to think of ourselves as, oh, we have a lot of African influences in our culture. We can taste it in the food. Yes, that's true. We can hear it in the music. We can see it in the way that we dress sometimes, and the things that we name our kids. But it even goes beyond just being African when we think about the European culture, the effect that has had on us. When we think of Junkanoo, Junkanoo isn't just African. When you really look at it, Junkanoo is also part European, because we were using what? European instruments. You don't find a trumpet or a trombone or a tuba in any part of Africa. That's strictly European, and that's where we have what Fernando Ortiz. He's a scholar from back in the 40s. He talks about transculturation, where we bring parts from different cultures together, and what you create something new, which is what Bahamian culture is, which is the reason why, because it's so young and it's still evolving and it's still finding itself, compared to countries like China and Russia, these countries that have been around for centuries. The Bahamian culture is still new, and because it's still nascent, it's finding itself more and more. Even based on this conversation that we're having today, we're contributing to what Bahamian culture means today and what it's going to mean tomorrow. So it's I can define it. I can define it the way that I see it, but that will be at the micro level. We can agree on what it means in the community. The way they do, my father used to live in Green Turtle Key before he died. I visited him one time. We went to see a Junkanoo parade. The way that they do Junkanoo there is different from the way that they do Junkanoo on Shirley Street. That's a meso difference, meso cultural difference. And then on the macro level, the way we do Junkanoo in the Bahamas is different from the way that they do it in somewhere like Belize, because they do still have little bits of Junkanoo left over in different parts of the Caribbean, and the southern hemisphere. And we can see these things. So what makes a Bahamian? I think about when the Bahamians are born in the Bahamas and they move to the States. Are they still a Bahamian? Do they have a claim to the culture? Sure, yeah. When a person migrates or immigrates from the States to the Bahamas and they contribute to the growing culture that is the Bahamian culture, are they Bahamian? Again, it goes
Well,
into philosophical questions.
we gotta, it sounds like we have a potpourri of different influences here. Some Bahamians would say from time to time, boy, you mix up just like Count Salad. All right. So we've had a whole lot of cultural influences coming to bear on what we our African culture or the ancestry. And so, you talk about Junkanoo, and it's moved from just goatskin drums and cowbells to a number of other instruments. Ms. Galanis, let's hear your take on what it means to be Bahamian.
Sure. Thank you. So I think my preferred definition for how to define what Bahamian is in terms of ethnicity, our practices. I think one of the most transformative assignments that I've had in my career thus far was as a fellow at the Library of Congress working with the Alan Lomax collection for the study of the Bahamian materials there, right? And my work there was really in repatriating those materials. And that took me to Cat Island. That was my first trip on a mailboat, as an adult. That was a completely different experience than anything I'd ever, experienced thus far. And I stayed in Cat Island for almost a year. That lived experience in Cat Island is completely different from my lived experience as, originating in New Providence. In terms of community, in terms of, like Nicolette was saying, dialect, intonation, um, the way that they hold on to cultural practices that we don't necessarily, cooking outside an outside kitchen on open fire. All of those things were new to me, but it was something that, that happens throughout the archipelago all the time that we are not privy to encounter because everybody doesn't have the opportunity to spend time, not just visit for a weekend, not just have the tourist experience, but actually spend time in these communities. I'd say that my definition of, and my work professionally is about documenting the Bahamian interior, right? And when I say that, I'm thinking about how do we decorate our homes, but not just the figurative, not just the physical interior, right? What are we learning? Is Grammy teaching me to cook fish? Is she teaching me how to make peas and rice? How do I catch crab? What do I adorn my yard with? How do I dress myself? Do I wear a hat to church on Sunday? Those kind of things, right? I can speak a little bit to the Gullah Geechee relationship, and I owe that to a dear friend and colleague, and also Bahamian artist, Anina Major. In 2021, she tapped me and said, "Hey, I want to do this project with you." We applied for a grant at the Penn Center in St. Helena, South Carolina. And all of the work that I do is research-based. I can trace, and I did not know the relationship before going into this project, but so I've been going back to Cat Island every year since I had this assignment, right? And Cat Island has, I think, had historically the most plantations throughout the archipelago than any other place. Eris Monroe, excuse me, called it the blackest place. Moncur, excuse me, called it the blackest place in the Bahamas because Cat Island held on to more Africanisms than any other island throughout the archipelago, is how he put it, right? I had been going back to the plantations in Cat Island, trying to figure out what was attracting me to them, right? And when I had this trip in 2021, I was able to make the connection. So there is a list of enslaved people that exists at the archives that gives us the names of about 90 or so enslaved folks who were from the Bourbon plantation that were property of Andrew DeVoe. Okay. And Andrew DeVoe Sr. was a very wealthy planter from Beaufort, South Carolina. And I can find in the records in South Carolina that after, those people relocated and had forced migration of their enslaved to the Bahamas wasn't quite what it seemed, what they had hoped it would be for most of them. And some of those people wanted to emigrate back to the US after US independence. And Andrew DeVoe was one of those people. And he had quite a hard time because, of course, he had defected during the American Revolution, right? But his daughters were in South Carolina, and they left a letter behind petitioning the Secretary of State in South Carolina to please allow him to repatriate to South Carolina. And she says in her own words, he has in his possession about 90 some Negroes who left South Carolina with him, right? And so those same folks that we can name in the archives from the Bourbon plantation were the descendants of and some of the original folks who left South Carolina with him. This is why we hear the similarity. It's almost not a similar. I can't even say similarity. Similarity would be dumbing it down. They have the same, we have the same dialect. We have the same intonation.
Yes.
We eat the same food, folkways, spirituality. It's like looking in a mirror. And that's
So
actually one
it's
of,
already an import from South Carolina. All right.
yes,
That's an aspect of our culture that came from the Gucci from South Carolina.
yes,
Yeah.
right. And so those were enslaved folks from Africa. So
Right.
we owe a lot of modern Bahamian culture, the things that we observe as Bahamian culture, the peas and rice, red rice. When I went in 2021, I told them, don't take me to no big box restaurant. To show me where I could find Gullah food. And they sent us to this gas station like 30 minutes outside of Beaufort. And when we walked in, Anina and I both said, this it, right? Like they had macaroni that looked just like ours. They had peas and rice. Anything you would think that you would find in the Bahamian takeaway, we were staring at it in South Carolina, right? If you hear them speak, I've said it before and made the mistake. Oh, what part of the Bahamas are you from? And they tell me, I'm not Bahamian.
Yeah, well,
I'm not Bahamian.
a whole
You
lot
know?
of them left South Carolina and went to the Bahamas, and they traversed between the Bahamas and South Carolina. Mr. Mortimer, you've been writing and filming, and I'm sure that you have a take on all of this.
Yeah, so I work with two minds, right? So one is I'm a documentary filmmaker and I also make narrative films. And documentary filmmaking is about showing things as they are, right? With I obviously you have a point of view, but you're supposed to back away from that a little bit. And kind of like what, one of my first ones I did by myself was a very small documentary where I traveled from Spanish Wells all the way down to Bannerman Town and just interviewed the most just interviewed everybody in every town. And I could tell you, like in Eleuthera, there's a Spanish Welsh accent, there's a Bryland accent, there's a North Eleuthera accent, there's a Central Eleuthera accent, and there's a South Eleuthera accent, or a dialect. And there's certain words that they use, and so a lot of my documentary work has been about how exploring the idea of diversity with among Bahamians. Um, in terms of my narrative work is about finding emotional truths, right? Because sometimes you take these films and they have to travel outside the country in order to be profitable. So it's like looking at Bahamians as not as props and not through a gaze that just kind of reduces us. And so looking at what is Bahamian through uh through a narrative lens is being very specific to where that person is in their life, which is a unique set of circumstances, but finding underneath that what is the emotional core that everybody who may not be from that particular place can look at and identify, because we're human at the end of the day, all of us all over the world. But like in terms of representation, it always hasn't been that. It's always about like in our representation and narrative films sometimes have been about, you know, service, for lack of a better word, or and so it's kind of like stripping that down and putting the culture first, as opposed a culture to me. I don't think in an administrative term. I think culture is just the way people live based on the reality of the place that they are, and being just very true to that, what that is, and finding the emotional truth that connects um, with people that may not be familiar with the said culture.
You can have the refinement, and I want you all to participate in this, of the culture, or you can have the costening of the culture. Dr. Bethel, since you're the anthropologist here, and let's talk a little bit about how we have refined the culture over the last 100 years or so, because as you mentioned when you started, our culture is not fixed. it has been changing from time to time. And I mentioned cultural imperialism. How have we refined it, or are we refining it?
That's kind of a loaded question. Um, uh, so I'd rather talk about changes, and I'd rather than thinking about refinement and coarsening, I think that what we may be talking about is how much conscious contribution we have in shaping our culture, right? You can either shape your culture unconsciously by the actions that you take and the choices that you make and the things that you like, or you can shape your culture with intent, right? And that can be in a variety of different ways. And I think that refinement and coarsening, the reason I'm backing off on them is that they have a kind of imperialistic ring to them. They tend to be linked with Europe in many ways. A lot of times the things that we said were refined also happen to be
But
imperial.
let me say this. Sorry to cut you off here,
Sure.
but you have young men in the Bahamas today who seem to have adopted an American culture.
Yep.
And there are many people in my age group and a little older who frown on some of that American cultural imperialism that have seeped into the Bahamian culture. And in a way, we believe that it's misbehavior.
Sorry, I'm going to sneeze.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Excuse me. So yes. So I think I was going in that direction because part of what I think is at work there is a lack of rootedness or a lack of appreciation for the uniqueness of who we are. And that has to do with what we have not necessarily culturally. I think that a lot of weight has to be carried by the way in which we have developed or shaped or not developed our society. Because
What we allow.
and what we allow, but also what we encourage, right? So one of the things that we don't encourage simply by policy is learning about your country. It is not part of what we do in the schools. We teach
Yes.
everything else. And we are such a small nation. We have 400,000 people here that we have counted. Let's say there are 600,000, 750,000 Bahamians around the world, let's say. That's tiny. In order to provide any kind of balance, we have to really consciously invest in allowing people to understand who and what we are. And of course, we're grappling with the fact that that's a range of things. But I think that's one of the things that I can say is happening, certainly in Nassau, because I don't necessarily want to say that this is happening everywhere. I don't think all young Bahamian men are necessarily doing this. Some young Bahamian men are busily getting rich catching lobster, right? Some are, you know what I mean? So, but in Nassau in particular, there's a void, and we've allowed that void to happen. We have not invested in those things that can provide people with a counterbalance to what they see in the United States. And what is happening, if you want to talk about coarsening, I would say that it is, but I can get really political here, but I think that what happens is that the global representation of what a young Black male is thuggish by design, right? And that is what is dominant, and that is what people are absorbing, and we're not providing counterbalances to that. We're not providing the narrative. One of the things that when I became an anthropologist that I began to articulate was these ideas that I was raised with. And I'm not saying that my family told me these things, but these just all permeating the whole society, that Bahamians are lazy, Bahamians are thiefs, Bahamians are stupid, Bahamians are this, Bahamians are that, right? And the darker the skin on the Bahamian, the more likely that people were going to be those things. And nobody ever, and then I would look around, and at 5 o'clock in the morning in this city, it's busy. People get up at 4 o'clock. We are not lazy. We are industrious people. Like Tamika, I spent time in Long Island, and people is be up 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. They go to the field, they put in a full day's work in the field, and then they come home in the heat. We are not lazy. You cannot survive. This is a country that the imperialists left, put behind their back, because they didn't think anybody could survive here. And we did. We didn't just survive here, we survived here. We beat the hurricanes. We learned how to navigate these waters, which are treacherous. We flourished. And we could not have done that if we were not lazy, if we were lazy, if we were not innovative. And these things, I blame policy. I blame bureaucrats. I blame the people who decide what we do in this country, instead of digging into who we are and how we survived in these islands. We will invest in bringing in this, that, and everything else from abroad. That's the model that young people see. And
Yeah,
so,
we've we've been mimicking Ms. Bullard, a whole lot of people for a very long time, and this mimicry is what is responsible for this, for want of a better word, cultural confusion that we have in the Bahamas. Am I right? Because of mimicking people. Yes?
Agree. And then also too, I think one of the things that's important to mention is the age of technology. As someone like my brother, I'm like, you're jit and all these words, like these are Atlanta words. Like, why are you talking like this? Where is your accent? And I think a lot of that can be contributed to, he's a gamer. The main streamers and the people that they're actually absorbing, that's the way that they talk. And so that's why too, I think that it's good to have that representation in all of those arenas, especially now. Like, I think on TikTok the other day, I saw a Bahamian streamer, and it was like weird to me to see this guy play a game, and like he said, "Yeah, bye," and like our accent is present, and it was like a foreign thing to me because of the prevalence of the American men in those spaces of gaming, streaming, YouTubing, all of those things. And we have that in the Bahamas. However, because of, it's not really possible to get funded from that. It's hard to reach your audience because of who the algorithm is pushing your content out to. It's hard to be influential in that sense. And so I think too, the government has mentioned interest in looking at our rights for, getting Bahamians to be monetized for their work, being on social media and doing streaming and stuff like that. So I think that could also contribute to us being in that space more. And then too, when it comes to Bahamian pride, I think I can speak to this. I think probably Letitia can speak to this as well. And all of you who are and have been away for a while, I feel like personally for me, that I was always proud to be Bahamian. I always knew what my culture was. I always knew the things that I liked and that I did personally as a Bahamian. But just the appreciation for what we have when you don't have it anymore, like just being landlocked and be like, I need to go to the beach because I take for granted that on my lunch break at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, I can pull up to Sanders Beach and sit in my car and eat. Like those things we don't really we take for granted. We really do.
But because of the archipelagic nature of the Bahamas, do we really understand our country, Ms. Bullard, Ms. Galanis? Do we understand the Bahamas? Civic education is very lacking in our country, I think, and a whole lot of people I find, in my journalistic career, do not have a real appreciation of the nature of the Bahamas. They don't understand the Bahamas. They know New Providence where they live. But man, you ask them where is Cherokee Sound, they don't know. Or where is Salina Point? They have no idea. I mean, you probably find that in the United States as well, people not knowing their country. But I think based on the size of our population, we have a very small population. We should have a better understanding of our country, the Bahamas. Wouldn't you say, Ms. Bullitt?
I agree. I agree. And I think there's so many things here that you all have said so far that I resonate with, because as uh a young person, I realize, like, even in this conversation, I'm learning a lot just about our country. And I think I've, in more recent times, especially since coming, like, being able to experience the States and come back several times, I really do want to understand my country. I want to understand, like, I want to like visit all the different islands and stuff like that. And I think even some of the initiatives now that I'm pushing is to try to get some of that education and try to like, I guess, in a way, expose Bahamians to Bahamians, learn the things that we don't know about the next, like, the other islands.
The
I was just recently,
cultural appreciation.
yes, for sure. And I think I think there's two things that come to mind. One is I wish it were, and maybe somebody on this call could enlighten me if I just don't know, but I wish it were easier to, or like somehow easier to even get to the
Yes.
other islands. Because I'm like, why is it that it's like to get from Grand Bahama to Miami is cheaper than for me to, like, take a trip to, like, an island that's not even half the distance away, you know? So I think partly it's that, because a lot of us, well, I can't speak for everyone, right? But like, even for going off to school, like, I had to get, by God's grace, like, get scholarships, get assistance, get help to make that happen, you know? But if I say I want to go to another island, I don't know that anybody's, like, necessarily assisting for me to get to Cat Island, you know, and experience these things. It's like a vacation, or you have to, you know, figure that out yourself. So I think that's one of the things. I think in some ways, it's been easier to even get to other cultures, to get to, like, stateside, as opposed to really being able to explore our archipelago as it is. So I think us finding a way to make that, not just the communication between islands, but that transportation between islands, could assist us with that experience. But two, to speak to something else that was mentioned here, and something I'm really passionate about, the reason I'm in the arts as it is now, the reason I tell stories is to help get our story, or our stories, because there's more than one, definitely more than one, but to get our stories out there. And I think when we're talking about mimicking other cultures and stuff like that, I think a part of it is that I remember growing up, I remember being in even, like, grade 6 or something, but the media that I'm intaking, the media that's telling me that lighter is better when it comes to skin, the media that's telling me about, like, straightening my hair is the most formal way to do something versus having it natural, the media that's telling me that is not Bahamian media. It's coming from elsewhere. And so I feel like as we really grow artistically, like, Bahamians have always been artists, and our culture is one of storytelling. But as I think it is important for us to start to really promote our culture and stories on a I don't know if the word is a grander level, but in a way so that kids coming up from whichever part of the Bahamas they're coming up have access to see, oh, this is us. Like we are we are creating our narratives kind of, instead of taking narratives from elsewhere and that being what's prominent in our
Yeah,
society.
but
So like, yeah.
mm,
Mhm.
it's difficult to do, right, Mr. Thompson, because of our geographic position. We've seen more of the Americanization of Bahamian culture than any other influence, I believe, in the Bahamas. And so I was always, I say it again, I was delighted to hear Brown Girl in the Ring being played by the orchestra in Boston that you arranged. But you still have the Americanization of the Bahamian culture, don't you?
You mean me, like, on a personal
Yes,
level?
yes, yes.
Um, I think that's more of again, the transculturation, what I was talking about earlier,
A
where
trans,
transculturation,
okay,
where there's pulling from Bahamian culture or pulling from American culture, and we bring it together to create something new.
okay,
And I think that that is how many cultures are developing today. When there's this philosopher back in the 60s, his name is Marshall McLuhan. He talked a lot about people say that he predicted many things that we're going through today. And one of those things is the internet, which created this global village that we all live in, where everyone is connected all the time. And we have access to different parts of people's culture that we wouldn't have had without the internet, or we wouldn't have had it as easily. And because of that, like someone mentioned, young men gaming earlier, that's it's apparently American, but it's very global. That happens in every country on some level. And it's shaping the global village for sure. But then still, there are parts of, like if we're focusing on Bahamian culture, there are parts of Bahamian culture that is growing outside of that. And so that's everything exists within a Venn diagram. And so, the global village overlaps Bahamian culture to a certain degree, but it isn't all of Bahamian culture. Bahamian culture is still its own thing if you look at it in its macro sense. And my contribution, through my art, I come from a different time in Bahamian culture than some people on the call. And I share my experience through my art in the way that I know how to do it best. And that is contributing to Bahamian culture. And, I've been educated in not just Bahamian schools, but also American schools. I'm pulling from American culture as well. That's just inherent because it's based on my experience. Does it mean that I am somehow less Bahamian or that my contributions are less so than someone that's only been educated in the Bahamas? I don't think so. Because again, when we look at what Bahamian culture is, it is this fusion of American, this European, this African. It's not just one thing. The Bahamas, to the way it is today, did not exist the way it didn't exist in like 300 years ago. This is something new, and it's all based on our contributions to it. And so, going back to the initial question about this refinement, um, refinement infers a goal, as if we know what Bahamian culture is going to look like in 100 years or so. I don't like to think of it like that. I like to think of it as it's evolving. We are contributing to it, and whatever it's becoming, that's what it is at the
yeah,
time.
but shouldn't we discard, or shouldn't we discourage certain infusions into what we consider Bahamian culture to be?
I think by discarding that sanitizes culture. And so we have these cultural enforcements that's forcing culture to become what somebody wants it to be. And again, that goes to the bureaucracy of just, the politics of things. I think that, listen, there's going to be a time when none of us on this call are going to be around. Our contributions hopefully will be. And that's what should matter, what we contribute. We shouldn't have to force culture on people. And also going back to just the way that we get to enjoy culture and sharing culture. I remember someone on the internet said some time ago, that culture shouldn't exist only for those who can afford it. When we think about Bahamians who haven't been to various family islands, some of them only been to Paradise Island, and I've had the fortune to go to a variety of Bahamian islands, and I've gotten to see. That's how I can speak from this perspective. I've gotten to see how these other Bahamians live.
But let me throw this out, Mr. Mortimer. How can we guard against negative influences coming to bear on our culture? Because there are negative influences. If you go around New Providence today, you would see negative influences that came from other countries in our region and the Americas. I'm not going to call any particular country. All right. How do we guard against these negative influences?
All right. So you just picked the perfect time to come into the screen. Here's what I think. Can you, hey.
That's all right.
Okay. Can you?
It's a good-looking boy. Go ahead.
Stop, Phoenix. I'm gonna call. So here's what I think. I think that there's nothing you can do about that. I can't judge it whether it's positive or negative. It just is what it is, and we are in a smaller environment right now, like in terms of the world and what we have access to. I think what we can do is counteract those. Phoenix. I think what we have to do is we have to counteract those narratives, like in terms of showing, because the more you repress it, the more it's going to like bubble up and it's going to become a thing. And then people are going to turn away from what you call culture. Phoenix, you have to go. You have to go.
Yeah.
Okay. What I think is important, what I like to work on as a filmmaker is showing different ways that culture presents itself, right? And showing people a variety of experiences of what you can be. And the mainstream doesn't show us that as Black people. Let's just be real. Like we're shown as one thing and one thing only, as one way of showing up as Black in the world. And if you're lucky, you show up as Black in the political world, or not Black as in the natural world that we all are a part of, like living in the Bahamas, because we have storms and we go to the beach and all that things. And so yeah, so I don't think it's something that we should stop, but I think we should provide alternatives of seeing ourselves, and that's the way to do it, and not in a forceful way.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, I'm going to give you this opportunity to talk about the work that you are doing to get the soft power of the Bahamas ubiquitous in the United States of America, since you're the cultural attaché here.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I'm entering into my third month now here in DC. But of course I would have lived in the DMV area for quite some time, and in the United States, going on 10 years now. So very familiar with how the arts work, very familiar with, how they prefer for things to be done here. And so in a sense, a lot of networking has been going on, a lot of opportunity seeking. One of the things that I'm super excited about is that next month, the MAC will be coming to perform in the Capitol at the International Trade Center. So every summer they have a concert series, and they've selected 4 performances out of the series this summer for embassies and different cultural organizations to take a part. So we jumped on that opportunity, and he'll be coming to perform. We're also hoping to do, I know the ambassador as well has been working on some art showcases, and we also have a display called Winter National, which will be at the end of the year, for the Bahamas to really just showcase itself. Last year they had 8,000 attendees, so we're really excited to be a participant this year, also to showcase our talent. We haven't settled on who we'll bring over for that, but really just finding ways to make Bahamian artists have exposure. One of the things that I also do for our Bahamian artists specifically is search for opportunities that they can submit their work. So I would have sent over to not only specific artists, but there's also a group in the Bahamas called Orange Economy. And they have a group chat of like 300 Bahamian artists in all different spectrums of arts and culture. And so I would share multiple opportunities with them, one of them being the Sundance Festival in LA, one of them being South by Southwest, which is a international festival that's held in Austin, Texas every year, and just finding different opportunities for Bahamians to not only display their work, but also have those important networking opportunities to, find an agent that can help them, promote their music. I'm hoping to do a few press releases as well when DMAC comes over next month. So very excited to open up those opportunities. Theater also working on getting, Drunken in Paradise over here and any other performing arts. I know I'm going to work very closely with Dr. Bethel to get some more of the Dundas' work over to America. So super excited for the work that we will be doing and the things that we've accomplished thus far.
Ms. Galanis, when people talk about the various cultures in our region or in the Americas, Caribbean, how is the Bahamas defined in terms of what we do, our culture?
I can't speak for how the Bahamas is defined. I can speak about it from my perspective in looking for the Bahamas on a global scale and how that has changed over the years. For me personally, I would say that as one of the smaller Caribbean nations, although we're making a mark now, and we owe that to a number of factors, right? Including the caliber of creators that we have, curators that we have now, that have widened the scope of reach of Bahamian artists, Caribbean, contemporary art, excuse me. When we think for a while, and the panel can correct me if you so feel, I felt like we were really insular in celebrating and sharing our art and our artists and art making practices. And I've seen that change to expand regionally and now expand internationally. We're not just making paintings of poinciana trees anymore, right? And they have their place and they're gorgeous. And that is a part of Bahamian art history, but we have now artists who are making work with social critique, political critique. We have musicians that are taking Bahamian music to an international stage. It's much more identifiable now. We're not, I had a famous curator say to me, "Oh, you small island people, are so concerned about." And I said, well, we have heavy hitters that are now making their way in the art world. So I think the opinion of what Bahamian art was in the 90s, even the early 2000s, is completely different from the scope of art that we're making now.
What brought that about?
I would have to say it would be reach, right? Who are we putting in spaces? I have to credit the folks at the National Art Gallery. I have to credit Holly Bino and her regional and international reach. I have to credit Amanda Colson. I have to credit, now Turn Gallery being a commercial space in the Bahamas and going to art fairs that were really untapped. I have to credit John Cox at The Current and his team over there in being in international spaces and really pushing the breadth and width of what Bahamian art is capable of.
Theater.
Could I, sorry, can I
And
add?
I'm sorry, and how could I leave out Nicolette with
No, that's
Shakespeare
no,
in Paradise?
Shakespeare in Paradise, eh?
Yes.
I wasn't going to go there. What I was going to say was what Tamika's talking about. All of that began with the foundation of a national institution, which did not exist before. We didn't have these national institutions in the 20th century. The NAGB opened in 2003. And that is where you can, if you want to if you want to pinpoint a change, that's where it is. Nations have to invest in their creative artists, and we have not
Yes.
done so.
Yes.
We've not done so. We're beginning to see the need for it. We're talking about an orange economy and what have you. But I can say this without fear of contradiction, having served my 5 years penance in the government, trying to get this stuff done. The amount of funding that is wasted on things that are not ours, and the amount of funding that is not spent on who we are is staggering. I'll just give you an example. Things have changed somewhat, because I was not quiet. But when I went into the ministry as director of culture, we have one national event that is truly national, that's sponsored by the government. And it's annual, and that is the National Arts Festival. And that what's unique about the National Arts Festival is different from all the other national events, like the sporting events you can think of, and they're also national, but they're not the same.
Clement Bethel started that, right?
Sorry?
Clement Bethel started that, right?
Yeah. He pulled it together in 1972, but he wasn't the person who founded the festivals. He just put them all together in a national thing. Mita Davis is the one who actually started the whole thing. And on some levels, Lady Ranfurly. But we would take adjudicators around the country. Everywhere somebody entered the National Arts Festival, we would carry adjudicators to see their performing arts, to see whatever, right? That's an expensive undertaking, and it was terribly underfunded. I think I had $140,000 when I came in 2003. That is not going to get you around the Bahamas. That just isn't. At that time, they were spending basically 2 million on Junkanoo, but they weren't counting where they were spending the 2 million. So they had 400,000 for Junkanoo in the budget. These figures are ridiculous. We were spending at the same time $250 million on education. But what were we teaching? We were not developing us. So what were we teaching for that $250 million? And culture had $500,000 to spend. These are the things that we really need to talk about. It's where you put your money. I've just come back from Prague. I spent a month in Prague directing with the Prague Shakespeare Company as a guest director. And Prague, the Czech Republic, was, when it came out of Soviet domination, its first president was a poet and playwright, Václav Havel. And everywhere you go in Prague, what blew my mind is that they have theaters in Prague like we have churches, like we have bars. You can walk down a street and there'll be 12 theaters on that street. And I'm like, what could possibly be going on in all of these theaters? But they invest. I can't even begin to calculate what they are investing in their performing arts.
But this investment shouldn't just come from the government.
It doesn't just come from the government, but the government has to start it. The government has to set the scene. The government has to write the laws that make it impossible for banks to do the foolishness that they do. Like, you cannot, as a creative artist, you can't go to a bank and we can't even easily receive money from abroad, right? We have to set up fake accounts in the United States of America to bring money into the country. It's like, if you're, for influence.
I'm sure Mr. Mortimer would have one or two things to say about that, right?
Like, it's so hard, right, to do this stuff.
Yes. Since you're in film production, Mr. Mortimer?
Yeah, it is. I just wanted, my son interrupted me one day, but I just want to make a point that I missed last time, and it's about, like wanting to be like part of a bigger society and having that society, but it also is like an older generation also puts that inside your head. And at first, as like that going foreign is better, that you have to go to
Yeah.
school to learn more, and like it's important what you bring back. But like I moved here I moved home after college. I didn't get a job in the States. I moved home, and people thought my life would be over. But everything that I've done in the Bahamas has allowed me got me invited to come here. You know what I mean? And so it's like twofold. It's like people are mimicking what they see on the screens, but also it's this innate sort of uh coddling, sort of feeling from an older generation that success is equal abroad, and that's not always the case, or the
Okay.
case most of the
Now,
time. But
mhm.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, before we run out of time, we just have just a few minutes. I would like for all of you to give me 30 seconds or so on how you feel that social media or the internet is going to or is impacting the Bahamian culture. And let's start with Ms. Bullitt for about 30 seconds and move on quickly.
So I think um I think that social media, kind of piggybacking off of some of what was said earlier, but I think that social media is just a part of that kind of global community that was mentioned, where we are bringing, like, seeing influences from all over the world, and we adopt some of these influences. But I also think that it can be a powerful tool to harness, to actually propel a lot of our culture, to expose the world to a lot of the culture that we have to offer here, and to really give them people a view of not the tour like the kind of tourist or paradise that has been imagined kind of thing, but give people an insight into the realness and the authenticity of um being Bahamian.
Okay, Ms. Galanis, same question.
So I'd like to touch on just the Gullah Geechee perspective. I'm watching Bahamians and Charlestonians find each other on the internet, and they are so surprised by having that image mirrored back to each other, right? And finding each other. I think social media is giving us the kind of reach that we have never ever had before, right? It's not just what we are being fed by the mainstream media. People actually have power in their hands. And I know you have to get to everybody, but I would also just like to make this point, please, to what Kareem was talking about and how we change these things. Um, I don't think it's solely the government's responsibility, but the way that we fund the arts has to be, we have to look at it and we have to revamp what's happening. Jamaica just committed 668 million for the production of Jamaican film, and it's specifically to push Jamaican culture forward from the inside, right? I don't need anybody else telling my story.
Okay,
And this is a model that I think we should be looking at for Bahamian arts.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes, as a Gen Z person myself who grew up in social media, I do see the hope and the future of our culture and being able to expose the rest of the world to who we are and what we do. We do have influencers who are doing great works. We have dances that have gone viral, like Reggie and all of these things that has made it to the American stages, American artists being interested in that culture. And so I'm very excited to see the future of our culture. I think it is ever evolving. And as we continue to get support from the head all the way down to the everyday people of the Bahamas, that it'll be something that will continue to help us to grow and help us to, like you suggested, refine who we are as a people and who we are as our culture.
So, Stefan Thompson.
Yes, thank you. I think social media is a fantastic tool for disseminating culture. And I see how it's been used already to do that. And I've used it as well. That's how I've connected with a lot of people. But going back to a lot of things we were talking about, I think we have to make this act of sharing culture a lot more appealing for Bahamians. And a big part of that does come in through the commercial aspect because you need money to survive. What I do, I don't make much money from. I barely make any money from writing music, but it takes a lot of my time. It took me a year to write that symphony. Am I making money from that? Of course not. But am I adding to the culture? Of course I am. We need to make it more appealing. Back when they were building cities like Prague, they contributed big money to creating their culture through music and through the arts. And I think that's what, and it should start with the government, but it should also come from the private sector as well.
Mr. Marmo, you have 30 seconds.
I think social media is very powerful. It democratizes everything. It removes the barriers that people have to talk to each other. And I think it could be a very great proponent of sharing culture in the way that it is that it's being spread. So I think it's a very I think it's awesome because it was something that was so impossible for people to be heard, and now they can just pick up their phone and be heard and be seen. And I think that that's really great for preserving the way people live right now, not what we think it should be.
Dr. Ethel?
Yeah, like everybody else, I think it's a great opportunity. I think that I think we have a habit of thinking of social media as dangerous, but I don't think that is unique to the Bahamas. That is the nature of social media everywhere, and it's because it's maybe unregulated. But from the point of view of the creative Bahamian, social media is one of the greatest opportunities that we've ever had. First of all, it's basically free. And so now we can reach, I don't have to wait for the Ministry of Tourism to maybe promote me somewhere. Shakespeare in Paradise has got to the world without that, thanks to social media. So,
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so very much. This has been a very rich conversation on the evolution of Bahamian culture, and I thank you all for participating today. I'm sure Bahamians watching, listening around the world have been enriched by this conversation today. So thank you so very much.
Thank
And
you.
I thank
Thank you so much.
Sonia Rose and Ashley Cargill here in the embassy in Washington, D.C. for putting this all together, finding our guests, and giving me such a wonderful topic to talk about today. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks.